All right. So we went over the basics of puberty and we looked at the fact that all children, regardless of their weight, go through a period of insulin resistance during puberty. But there is a problem when a child goes through puberty and already has excess adiposity. So if we look at this figure, we see in A that visceral adiposity, general inflammation, mitochondria function, and the person's genetics, as well as puberty, all can lower insulin action. And this will require higher insulin secretion from the pancreas. So the insulin signaling is not working very well. So our body's response to that is to put more insulin out there. So the more insulin will promote anabolic pathways. Remember that anabolic equals building. And we tend to think about it of building muscle, but it can be muscle or fat. And that also means increased glucose transport and increased glycogen stores. So we could be building muscle, fat, glycogen. Although we have a limited room for glycogen, so any excess is going to become fat. We also have more insulin that's going to suppress the catabolic pathways. So catabolic equals breakdown. And so we're suppressing glycogenolysis, which is the breakdown of glycogen, and we're going to suppress gluconeogenesis, which is the breakdown of muscle to make glucose. And that's if the insulin response is sufficient, we're able to maintain euglycemia. On the other hand, though, we may start with the same indicators, visceral adiposity, inflammation, but we may have either inherent beta cell defects or a progressive beta cell failure. And that could be due to excess visceral adiposity. So if this is really high, and potentially if muscle mass is low. That will make it so that we have an insufficient insulin response. So we're going to get high glucose transport, and we're going to still see this worsening hyperglycemia. So we may have higher glycogen stores, but at the same time, we may also be using these glycogen stores if our insulin is not enough to promote glucose uptake. And we also can see that it will stop suppressing catabolic pathways, so double negative there, but the breakdown will continue. So we may see an increase in glycogenolysis and an increase in gluconeogenesis. So there was a study that recently finished called the RISE study, and I won't go into what RISE stands for, but basically they were looking at the difference between youth onset type 2 diabetes and adult onset type 2 diabetes. And these were very large, very well powered trials, and you can see they're fairly recent. And the findings from the RISE study have been, from the perspective of a researcher, alarming. They found that youth had 50% lower insulin sensitivity compared to adults with type 2 diabetes, measured during both hyperglycemic clamps and oral glucose tolerance tests. So, youth equals decrease insulin sensitivity. Ooh, I didn't make that one right. Here we go. Let's try that again. Here we go. So youth have lower insulin sensitivity, They also had hyper-responsive beta cells compared to adults. So they're not as insulin sensitive, so they're pumping out a lot of insulin. And they also noticed that there was glycemic worsening, and it was more common among youth than with adults who had impaired glucose tolerance or recently diagnosed type 2 diabetes. And possibly the most alarming is that youth with impaired glucose tolerance or recently diagnosed type 2 diabetes did not respond well to glargine or metformin. And these are our frontline diabetes medications. So together, youth onset type 2 diabetes is more aggressive and it's treatment resistant. Also, simply because of their younger age, it's more likely that they will live longer with type 2 diabetes. And that's going to increase the risks of neuropathy and cardiovascular disease, as well as all the other risks associated with type 2 diabetes. So, in summary, nutritional status is an important permissive signal for puberty. And the increased overnutrition, which we usually call obesity, is related to either earlier pubertal onset or is related to earlier pubertal onset, not either, particularly in girls. But this might just be because it's easier to measure in girls because menarche is very obvious. Earlier puberty is related to persistently high BMI throughout adulthood in women. And although everyone becomes insulin resistant during puberty, for children with existing glucose intolerance or obesity, this may result in a beta cell burnout. And this is particularly worrisome because type 2 diabetes is more aggressive and resistant to treatment in adolescents. So in the next section, we're going to talk about weight loss in adolescents, including medical nutrition therapy, bariatric surgery, and GLP-1 agonists.